back when I was working as a chaplain at a hospital, there was an absolutely lovely chaplain who worked with me, much more experienced than I had. I was more of a chaplain in training. And I would run into this lovely woman in the kitchenette every morning where we were making our tea and coffee, and we'd talk about our lives, and we'd talk about our patients. And I often saw her in the behavioral health unit, which was an area that was assigned to me, where I would go in to see folks who were having in a crisis situation, and they had been admitted to the hospital to have some work done so they could get steadier, so they could be released into hopefully some kind of program that would help them in the long run. So we would talk about those experiences as well, and I would see her sometimes in the behavioral health unit, and we'd wave to each other as we passed by. She was always delightful, and she was not a Unitarian Universalist, but she confessed to me one day when no one was around. She said, "Yours is the religion I really like." So she might have just been being nice, I don't know. So one Monday morning, she did not come into work, and I didn't think much about it. Everybody takes a day off every now and then. And then she didn't come in Tuesday or Wednesday, and so I asked where she was. And I was told that she was taking some personal time. And the next day, I was in the behavioral health unit, and I saw her there, not as a chaplain, but as a patient. And I have to tell you, that moment of recognizing that she had moved from a Friday to being a chaplain to a Monday to being a patient in the very unit that she served was deeply meaningful for me. I knew intellectually for any one of us, we are the same in terms of we all have mental health, and we can all move somewhere across that spectrum at any given point in time. But to see my friend there in such a short span of time, and to realize that she had moved from being a caregiver to someone who needed care, was really, really something meaningful for me. It brought home the fact that when we talk about things like mental health, we're never speaking about others. We are speaking, of course, about all of us, ourselves, humanity. I want you to know she did get the help that she needed, and she did eventually get back to work, and she remains a lovely, wonderful person who still struggles with this from time to time, or maybe all the time, however she might explain that journey. But the point is that she was able to reach out for the help she needed at that time. As Cheryl read, there's a book from Barbara Myers called Held, Showing Up for Each Other's Mental Health. And Barbara Myers is a Unitarian Universalist who wrote that book basically to make sure that we in our UU congregations were saying that mental health is a real thing, that everyone is dealing with, and that we all either have been someone or know someone who needs help with their mental health from time to time. Now, you might think that that's an obvious thing to state, but the reality is, in our Unitarian history especially, and this is the culture that we have mostly inherited, the Unitarian side of our Unitarian Universalist history. In our Unitarian history, this is not something that we really necessarily reckoned with. We, as UUs here in the United States, come out of a very learned tradition. Our early Unitarian ministers were all trained at Harvard Divinity School, and that was a big name to drop then. It's a big name to drop now. Harvard Divinity School, we had people who were at the upper levels of society, economically, socially. We had people who were very educated. We had women who were getting degrees far before that was the norm. We had all kinds of reasons to think very highly of ourselves, and rightly so. We were a very esteemed group of people coming out of New England, the intelligentsia there, the wealthy. That was us. That was the culture. So even as you had people like Dorothea Dix in our Unitarian tradition coming in saying, we need to do better for people with mental health issues, we still thought of those folks as them, and then there was us, two different groups of people. And that continued throughout our history of helping other marginalized folks. We started to think about helping people who were enslaved and helping people who were poor and helping people who were disabled, but it was always about them, not us, not the people who were here in our midst. And that culture has carried on in some ways. We are a very presentable group of people. Even today, we try to pull ourselves together so that we look like we've got our act together when we show up on Sunday morning. It's just part of the culture of where we come from and who we are. So it wasn't until 2018 that the UU Mental Health Awareness Network was formed. Really, the first time that we were really acknowledging this idea that we all have mental health that we have to tend to. And then this book by Barbara Myers came out just 2 years after that. So this is new territory for us. New territory for us to not just say, oh, there's folks out there who struggle with things, but actually the reality that this is us. We're not so special. We're part of the human experience, and we all have mental health, and we are all dealing with mental health, and we know people who are dealing with their mental health in sometimes ways that are really challenging for them. When I was in seminary, not that long ago, really, that's not ancient history, but I don't think we ever spoke about mental health once. I don't think it ever came up. They sent us away for 3 days for psychiatric evaluation when we started on the pathway to ministry. But we didn't talk about why we were doing that or what they were even looking for. They just send you to this place and you get your report back, whether you're cleared or not. But we didn't talk about that. And as soon as I got into congregational ministry, I started realizing it was a huge piece missing from my training. It was happening all the time where people were coming to me and saying, I have someone in my life that I don't know what to do. Or I'm facing a crisis point. I don't know what to do. Or I'm seeing things in congregational life, leaders who are changing in how they're behaving and acting in their roles. And I don't know how to name that or what to do. At one point in one congregation, I had 3 families, 3 core families in that congregation who had these 3 incredible, wonderful teenagers who had grown into incredible, wonderful young adults who, at the same time, in their early 20s, had the onset of mental illness happening. Now, these 3 core families had no idea that within a 6-month period, these other families were dealing with the same thing because no one was talking about it. It was just brought as a problem to me, but we weren't speaking about it openly and authentically, and people weren't connecting and getting the help that they needed. The truth is, I think that mental health affects everything that we do and experience in the world, and it also is part of all the things that we're working for in our mission here in the world. When we talk about the things that we're fighting, whether it's transphobia or homophobia or racism or misogyny or ableism, when we take mental health out of the picture of how that both feeds into the cycle and becomes important because of the cycle, then we're missing a huge part of the picture. I worked for a while as an HIV prevention counselor at AIDS Services Foundation in Orange County. And when I took the job, I knew that I would be trained to actually give people the test for HIV, which I was really nervous about that because it seemed very scientific and medical, and I don't do those things. But I figured it out, and I got my certification and did that. But what was so amazing about the way that that was set up was we gave people the free test, and this was people from all walks of life, people of all economic backgrounds and gender identities, and so on, would come in and they'd get a free test. And then while the test took 20 minutes or so for the results to come back, while it was sitting there in the test tube, we would sit down and talk to them one-on-one. And I remember the shock on some people's faces because one of the first questions that I would ask would be, so how are you doing right now? How's life? And they'd be like, well, what? Why are you asking me about my life? What's that got to do with anything? And we'd talk more when they would open up. Sometimes folks wouldn't open up, but when they would, I'd find out, where they had support in their life, what they might be struggling with. And what I realized over time is that so much of what we sometimes call a behavioral issue, a problem, was actually related to people's mental well-being. If they had support, if they weren't struggling from the pressures of a society that didn't accept them for this reason or that reason, if they were able to find their way with a sense that other people cared, then they were able to make different choices for themselves that kept themselves safer. These conversations were, for the most part, not about technical things, technical ways to keep yourself safe. It was about how to be in a mindset where you felt whole and supported enough so that you could go out in the world and make choices that kept you safe. Big, big learning experience for me to help people move beyond I'm fine and talk about how they were truly feeling. To recognize that their behavior might be rooted in shame or disconnection. They might have survival patterns that they developed to deal with the things in their life, survival patterns that maybe always ultimately weren't healthy for them along the way. And then, of course, a lot of folks are just managing however they can, mentally and emotionally, because they don't have the mental health resources available to them. So they're just figuring it out along the way. And that is something that was very meaningful to me to realize, because I recognize that I could be on the other side of that table, as could any of us at any point in time. A few different challenges in our life, a few different choices along the way, some things that maybe weigh us down where we're struggling. And of course, there's no shame at all in getting a test like that. And some folks were very supported, and they came in as part of their regular attention to their health, which was an important thing as well. But what we're saying here today, most importantly, is that we all have mental health, each and every one of us, and it's something that we should attend to however we can. I think of it like a marathon. If you knew you were going to be running a marathon in a few weeks, if you're starting from scratch, you'd maybe try to run around the block, right? And then maybe the next day you'd run around the block twice, or maybe a block and a half, whatever you can do. And then the next day a little more. You probably wouldn't drop yourself cold into that marathon. Well, right now, in our world today, with everything going on, we sort of all got dropped into the middle of a marathon. We're dropped into a world that is challenging our mental health, and we have no choice but to run along and try and figure it out along the way. But we also have the choice to stop every now and then and really pay attention to where we are, what we're feeling, what's happening inside of us. On Thursday, 7 of us gathered here in the sanctuary for the Grief and Growth group. And this is a group where folks can share how they're feeling under this big umbrella of all the things we're experiencing, both personally and out there in the world. And it takes some vulnerability to share. But the idea is that we feel a little bit better, a little bit lighter when we have that opportunity. I know some people were coming in feeling the weight of what's happened with the Voting Rights Act this past week. It's hard not to take these things and hold on to them and not know what to do with them once they're inside of us. And those things are like little arrows that are hitting the center of our mental health all the time. And we have to have the tools so that we're able to process these things and not allow ourselves to completely succumb to the challenges that they bring all the time. You know, a group like that, which I encourage all of us to have somewhere, whether it's a group, whether it's a friend, wherever it is, a therapist, counselor, somewhere that you can go and let some of this get sorted out with other people. Because the truth is, I don't think we can do this alone. I think in isolation, it becomes more and more difficult to work through this stuff. We have to do it relationally. So it's so important for us to find those places where we get support, where we can talk openly and honestly about what we're going through, where we can know that it is okay to not be okay, that everybody is not okay sometimes. And that's all right. I do know that sometimes we get worried about the question of, how are you doing? What if somebody answers that seriously? What if I ask somebody seriously, how are you doing? And they say, I'm not doing well, and I need all these things, and can you help me with this, and can you help me with that? And you think, oh my goodness, I'm going to be sucked into something that I'm just overwhelmed. I can't do all of that. It's okay. You can actually set boundaries when you ask that question. And you can also, when you're answering that question, know that someone else might not be able to fulfill everything that you need, but they can, like that rabbit, listen. I was thinking of a play that I was in where after a rehearsal one night, I came out to the parking lot and another actor in the play, she was sitting down in the parking lot on the ground with an unhoused man that we often saw in that area. And I thought, what's she doing? She was, just a few feet away from him, and he was talking, and she seemed to be listening, and I thought, well, is this okay? And so I got in my car and I waited, because nobody else was there at that point. And after maybe about 10 minutes, she got up and she headed to her car. And I went over to her and I said, are you okay? What was going on? She said, I just felt like he needed somebody to listen to him. So I did. And I said, well, weren't you worried that maybe he would need a whole bunch of things, and he would want a lot of things from you and so on? And she said, I could just say no. I can't help you with that right now. I can just get up and leave when I can't carry the conversation any further. And that was a really wonderful moment to witness, because you realize you do have the power to ask someone how they're doing. You can listen, you can sit with them, but you can't necessarily fix everything, and that's okay to know that and state that. And it's okay to be sharing with someone what's going on with you, and they might have to say, I wish I could help you with that. Or I wish I could listen more, but I went through a really terrible divorce, and I feel like I'm not being a good listener to you right now because I'm thinking about my divorce instead of your divorce. So let's have you go talk to our other friend over here who can really listen to you in this moment. I think it's important that we're not afraid to ask, how are you doing? And wait for folks to talk about what's really going on beyond the surface, I'm fine. It's okay. It's okay to share both ways. I think ultimately, as Unitarian Universalists in this moment, as we're trying to draw the circle wider and bring folks in who maybe have not fit into some of those boxes I was talking about earlier that are part of our history, this becomes a time to make this a place where saying something other than "I'm fine" becomes the norm. We have other options beyond that. There's so much brokenness in our world today, and so much of it is tied to unaddressed pain, to things that folks are going through that aren't being processed or supported very well. A lot of the people we get so upset about out in the world sometimes, what they say, what they do, what they believe, I see the trauma under there. I see the mental struggles those folks are going through. I can tell you honestly, I don't know anyone in my own life who doesn't, if they're a fall on the other end of the spectrum in how they understand the world today, I also know about some of the real personal pain that they've had in their lives. It's never really got sorted. It was never really paid attention to. So I see that picture. So, this is our call this morning, I believe, to go beyond "I'm fine." We don't pretend that it's us and them. We recognize it's all of us. And we recognize that with joy and gratitude, because this is part of what it means to be human, is to struggle with life sometimes. It's okay. That is what it means to be a human being, that sometimes things are wonderful, and sometimes they're awful, and sometimes they're somewhere in between, and it's okay, and that is the experience for all of us here on this earth. We are all grappling with life. But none of us are meant to grapple alone.